Well, welcome you
Welcome back.
to our fifth class, I think.
Is it 8?
Yeah. It's been a good class. We've been learning a lot, I hope, about the saints that have walked our land, and hopefully you're being inspired not only to learn more about them and learn about the other saints we aren't looking at, but also to maybe find ways to incorporate their own saintly characteristics and spirits into your own lives. Tonight, as you know, we're going to look at St. Nikolai Velimirović, or St. Nikolai of Žiča. To be the second Serb we've looked at after St. Sebastian. So let's begin. After all phones have been silenced, turned off or smashed. All right. So, St. Nikolai was the firstborn son of his parents, whose names were Dragomir and Katerina, in Velimirović. I also have to apologize to everyone here and to any Serbs that might watch in the future that I'm going to butcher whatever Serbian names there are. So, yeah, that's the least of my worries in this one. He was given the name Nikola, not Nikolai, but Nikola, at his birth. He was born on December 23rd, so the day before Christmas Eve, in 1880. His parents were simple peasants, but they were, pious, and especially his mother. He especially learned the spiritual life from a young age from his mom, Katerina. He was baptized shortly after his birth at the monastery of Chelii. See? I tried to type it out how it's supposed to be pronounced, or how I think it's supposed to be pronounced, based on the pronunciation guide in the front of the book, but we'll get there. This monastery, as we'll hear later, is we know it's especially nowadays because of St. Justin Popović, who was the spiritual father there and reposed there, and it was a friend and disciple of St. Nikolai. This monastery served as the parish church for those living in the area. Nikolai was one of 10 children, but couldn't see exactly when or how, but all the other 9 children in his family died at some point, leaving him as an only child. There's various causes that contribute to that. He spent a lot of time at the monastery as a child. He was either going for services with his mother. They would confess, commune, these kinds of things. Or his father would take him there for basic education in writing and reading. This is where, there was some kind of tutor who taught everyone, as has been in the case in a lot of, traditional societies, that the monastery is not only a place of spiritual education, but also, worldly education. But while he was there learning and being educated, during the breaks, what we call recess, he wouldn't spend the time with the other children. He would go off into the corner, as said, by the bell tower, and he'd continue reading, or he'd be praying with himself. He wouldn't run around and play games with the other kids. Because of this and other reasons, his teacher recognized his natural giftedness in learning, and he recommended that he continue his secondary education. So his father took him to the monastery to learn, not expect, to learn, basic things, just so that he could, get by. They expected that he would, basically work back at the house or around the house, live with them, but he wanted to be able to, read and write. So his plan was never to do further education like high school or anything like that. But his teacher saw that he was a very gifted student, and he actually helped him, suggested and helped him to move on and to further his education. And after finishing grade 10, he applied to and was rejected from the military academy due to failing a physical. Said that his chest circumference was too small. He was kind of a small, As a child, he was kind of frail. And as he was growing, he's still a little bit small. But this was the providence of God working, that he wasn't admitted to the military academy. Because after being rejected from the military academy, he applied to the seminary in Belgrade Theological Seminary, and he was admitted. But he was almost not admitted because it said that he did not have a great aptitude for music. But he gets rejected from the military academy, applies to seminary, that kind of changes the course of what he thought his life would be. During his time in seminary, he was a top student, and he read many philosophers and great thinkers. As you see throughout his life, he's always trying to learn more, gain more knowledge. In 1902, he graduates from the seminary, and following graduation, he takes up teaching positions near his family home, in villages and cities near his family home. And while he's teaching, he also assists the parish priests in the various duties at the parish. Also, following graduation, he was awarded a stipend from the government and selected by church authorities to continue his education in either Europe or Russia. And he chose to go to Europe. And in Europe, he went to the Bern University in Switzerland as his kind of main hub. But at the same time, while he was in Europe, he also studied in Germany and England during that time. But he would also eventually take a trip to Russia to try to further some studies. But it was at Bern in Switzerland where he actually was completing a degree. But also, he was working, like we said, he went to England. He was working at Oxford, completing another degree. And so, at Bern, he successfully defended his dissertation entitled "The Faith in the Resurrection of Christ as the Fundamental Dogma of the Apostolic Church," which earned him his doctorate in theology. In 1909, he was preparing to defend his dissertation in philosophy in Oxford, but he eventually defended it in Geneva, in French, earning his doctorate in philosophy. So we see that what the plan for his life in the beginning, with his father trying to teach him just a little bit, has greatly expanded, and now he has 2 doctorates. one in theology and one in philosophy. And he has an insatiable desire to learn. Following these successful defenses, he returns back to Serbia, but soon he became very ill with dysentery. He spent 6 weeks in the hospital, and at this point is one of the major turning points in his life, because you have to be very careful. But he did what's typically not recommended and vowed that he would become a monk if he recovered. So that's how serious it was. He thought he would actually die, and that it would be a great, miracle if he recovered. And so, in honor of that miracle, he would become a monk. And as you can guess, he recovered. And so he fulfilled his vow. And following his recovery, he was tonsured a monk with the name of Nikolai, and then ordained, obviously, to the diaconate and then the priesthood in December 1909. So he returned to Serbia in 1909, got sick, made the vow, and at the end of 1909, he was already tonsured and ordained. Things moved very quickly, apparently. After this tonsure and ordination, he put all of his education at the service of God and the church. And he desired to become a teacher at the seminary, at St. Sava's Seminary in Belgrade, to educate the next generation of theological students and hopefully, priests and bishops. But if you remember that I said that he'd only finished up to grade 10, when he applied to be a teacher, they found that his secondary education wasn't complete. So he had to, test out of that. And then there's a few other things that kind of hoops he had to jump through that seemed kind of silly, coming from a man with 2 doctorates that had to do. But eventually got the position and was teaching at the seminary there, Belgrade. While at the seminary, he was also an active preacher in the churches in Belgrade, and he became a lecturer at another university. And on top of all of this, he also began to publish his articles, sermons, and other studies on philosophical and theological topics. And though he was young, he was gaining popularity not only among those in Serbia, but also in the whole Yugoslav region. But while gaining popularity, he also gained enemies. At one trip, on his return to Belgrade, he was pulled off the train by Austrian authorities for multi-day questioning because they didn't like, maybe some of his speeches that he was giving and in their nationalistic kind of character and their, pro-Serbia character. Later, during the Balkan Wars, which we heard about a little bit with St. Sebastian, and then in World War I, so from about 1912 to 1918, he did what he could to minister physically or materially and spiritually to his countrymen. He would volunteer aid to war victims and the sick and the suffering, those affected by the wars. He also renounced his salary during this time from the government. Remember, in a lot of traditional Orthodox churches, the priests are paid by the government. They don't have this parish model that we have in this country. But he actually didn't take a salary, so that he was trying to do his part monetarily in giving that money, or letting the government keep that money for the wars. But he would also give very inspiring sermons and speeches during this time to spiritually uplift the people. Also during this time, from April 1915 to April 1919, he was sent abroad to America and England to promote the Serbian cause and to explain the truth about Serbia's situation to the West. A lot of lies have been told about Serbia and its people, and therefore he was sent to kind of gain some support and to straighten things out. And so he would give lectures at multiplicity of venues, theaters and churches and hotels and this, lots of different places, trying to enlighten and inspire the people who came for these lectures. And it's said that he even inspired some to go to the Balkans and fight for Serbia. This is how you kind of, his personality, but also his way with words would inspire people. In March 1919, while he was still in England on this trip, he was elected as Bishop of Žiča, and but he was later transferred to Ohrid in 1920. So 1919, elected as Bishop of Žiča, and then transferred to Ohrid in the next year, 1920. But then in 1934, he was transferred back to Žiča. But during this time, as Bishop of Žiča and Ohrid, it was a complete time of renewal and inner transformation for him. It was a really spiritual turning point in his life. And it's said that there was definitely a pre-Ohrid or Žiča, Nikolai, and a post one. So before becoming a bishop, it's said that he sought to impress those around him. He wanted to be influential. He was obviously living in that kind of academic, circles, and he was trying to impress with his speech, with his writings. Even with the cassocks that he wore, even as a young Hierom monk. We think of a monk who should not be, trying to worry about, everything that their outward appearance. But, he would wear like the finest silk cassocks, and he would try to be, nicely, trimmed up and everything. This was before he became a bishop. But after becoming a bishop and experiencing the simple life and spirituality of the laity, of those under him and who are under his spiritual care, and along with his frequent trips to Mount Athos, because while he was a bishop, he would take every summer a trip to Mount Athos, he became much less interested in worldly accolades and his impression on worldly people. And this could be seen as definitely a turning point, like I said, but into a second period of his life. He cast away from him at this time and looked with disdain on all that was worldly. He no longer cared to look the best, to sound the best, anything like this, but not that he, started becoming someone else, like he wasn't some intelligent person or he's just a simple person. He still, had a way with words. But now it wasn't for, kind of didn't have any vanity in it. With the transformation of his inner man, the words of Christ, "I am the way, the truth, and the life," became everything to him. And it's said that Nikolai the genius became Nikolai the saint at this period. During his time in Ohrid and Žiča, he labored diligently on behalf of his flock for their spiritual and material well-being, much like we've seen with all the other saints we've studied. They have great care for those under them, not only their spiritual care, but their material well-being. He led a renewal of monasticism, rebuilding destroyed, deserted, or half-emptied monasteries. He renewed and rebuilt cemeteries and memorials. He erected public drinking fountains and established orphanages and children's shelters. He was also a great promoter of Orthodox unity, and he nurtured good relationships with his brother bishops in Bulgaria and Greece. And also at the same time, he did do some political work, but not for, politics' sake, but for the sake and the good of the Serbian people, and for their spiritual well-being. So, one thing he did was he worked towards dismantling a concordance, which is, an agreement or a treaties between the Vatican and some political party. And in this case, it was the Vatican and Serbia. He knew that would be detrimental to the spiritual life of the Serbian people if the Vatican could get power within the Serbian government. So he did work politically, but it was never just because he liked this or that party, but it was always for the spiritual good of the people. But all these labors were interrupted by the beginning of World War II. In 1941, Bishop Nikolai was arrested by the Germans on the feast of Saints Peter and Paul. So 1941, if you know some World War II history, was when the German occupation started in Serbia. And as with a lot of these things, they go after not only the political leaders, but spiritual leaders, because they're able also to inspire the people to lead revolts and such like this. And so he was arrested in 1941. He was initially confined to the monastery of Ljubošćenija, maybe, and then later transferred to the monastery of Velimirović. And at Velimirović he was also imprisoned with the patriarch at the time, the Serbian patriarch, Gavrilo. In September 1944, Patriarch Gavrilo and Bishop Nikolai were then transferred to Dachau. That terrible concentration camp. And that's where they stayed until the end of the war. And I want to read for you a little description in his own words of what he thought about being in Dachau. And this is someone is giving their a remembrance of him in this conversation. So this person says, when we met, he had aged and had become frail, but the gaze of his black eyes were still very penetrating. Like once before when he used to speak to someone and his eyes penetrated their heart. We began to speak about life in the world, about the church, Russia. Your Grace, I asked him, do the sufferings and the deprivations of the concentration camps kill one spiritually, or do they revive people? For example, I have known people, devoted people, who could not muster enough strength to pray. All of their strength had been focused on a piece of bread, on one onion, on a cup of warm water. The bishop answered, it was like this in the camp. You sat in a corner and repeated to yourself, I am dust and ashes. Lord, take my soul. Suddenly your soul ascended to the heavens and you saw God face to face. However, you could not bear it, so you said to him, I am not ready, I cannot, take me back. Then you sat for hours on end and repeated to yourself, I am dust and ashes, Lord, take my soul. And once again the Lord took your soul. In short, if it were possible, I would give the remainder of my life for 1 hour in Dachau. The bishop lifted his head and looked straight into my eyes. I could not endure that look. The eyes of a man who met God face to face were looking at me. He told me this too. The prison guards approached me and mockingly asked me, "Do you believe that Jesus Christ was God?" "No," I answered them. They would start to laugh and then question me again. "That means that you are no longer a believer?" "I do not believe. Instead, I know," was my answer. They became irritated and left immediately. After some time, they forced a conversation again and said, "Was your Jesus the son of a Jewess?" "No," I answered. "Well, whose son was he then?" "The Son of Man," I said, and they did not know what to retort. Obviously, at Dachau, they experienced great deprivations, tortures, abuse. But you see, the inner man and what his answer just was, that he would pray because of all of those abuses and tortures to be taken to the Lord. But then in those spiritual moments, he would experience something so profound that he couldn't take it there. And he learned to take it, in the prisons. And he was so spiritually enlivened through that terrible experience that, like you heard him say, that he would trade his rest of his life for just one more hour there. On May 8th, 1945, the prisoners of Dachau, along with Patriarch Gavrilo and Bishop Nikolai, were set free by the 36th American Army Division of the Allied Forces. And following their release, they drifted from country to country until the Patriarch could return to Serbia and take up his place as Patriarch again. But for whatever reason, Bishop Nikolai was not able to return to Serbia at this time, and he would not return until after his death. And so in 1946, following the Patriarch's return to Serbia, St. Nikolai immigrated to the United States. And he spent the last 10 years of his life here in these lands. And he continued his pastoral and mission work. And like many of the other saints that we've heard about, he did a lot of traveling throughout the country, trying to find and minister to Orthodox that were spread throughout our lands. And even went up into Canada to do the same. But it's also part of his work while he was here was to teach. And so he actually taught at most of the major theological schools in the United States here, which included the Serbian Seminary at St. Sava's Monastery in Libertyville, Illinois. He taught at St. Vladimir in New York, at Holy Trinity in Jordanville, and at St. Tikhon in South Canaan. And at St. Tikhon is where he spent the last years of his life from 1951 to 1956. St. Tikhon Monastery there they're in South Canaan. They have the seminary on one side of the road and the monastery on the other. And the monastery is the oldest monastery in the United States, in the New World maybe. So he spent the last 5 years of his life there, teaching at the school, living at the monastery there. And then even for a year, 1955 to 1956, till his repose, he served as actually the rector of the seminary. So as, the head honcho. And on March 18th, 1956, he reposes in the Lord. He got up from bed to prepare himself to celebrate the liturgy through prayer, and was later found dead in a posture of prayer. He woke up to serve the liturgy on earth, but found himself serving the liturgy in the heavens. On March 27th, his holy body was taken from St. Tikhon in Pennsylvania to St. Sava Monastery in Libertyville. Libertyville, that monastery is a Serbian monastery, which is why the connection of why he would be taken there. And he was buried there in Libertyville until April 1991, when his desire to be buried in his homeland was fulfilled, and his relics were transferred to Serbia to be buried at his home monastery of Celije, next to his friend and disciple, Father, now Saint Justin Popović. On May 19th, 2003, he was officially glorified as a saint by the Serbian Church and added into the calendar of saints. He is known as either the Serbian Chrysostom, Serbia's Chrysostom, or the New Chrysostom, just because of the eloquence of his words, whether in speech or in writing. So, let's briefly take a look at his writings now. So from 1911 to 1959, he had 25 major works published. Obviously, two of those were posthumously published. And that doesn't include, his articles or his, other little things. And they think that if everything of his was published, it would comprise more than 20 volumes. That's how prolific his speaking and writing was. In fact, there's, if I can see it real quick, maybe. There we go. Let's see. Oh, sorry. So there is a Serbian bishop, Lawrence, of Western Europe, that's, or at least at some point when this book was published. Okay. So it's since been completed. But at this point, he was working on the collected works of St. Nikolai, which at that point it comprised 10 volumes. So, it came to be even more. That's how it's just so amazing. Everywhere he did, everything he did, and everywhere he went, he had all this time to write, and not write like easy kind of works, but deep theological works. Some things, it's funny. Some things we have of his writings, they don't actually. Well, now they do, but they haven't actually in Serbian because he wrote them in another language. And so they had to be translated into Serbian for them to have, the Serbian Chrysostom's writings. Many of his works, if they're not explicitly poetic, were written very poetically. He not only was an intelligent man, but he was also, a deeply poetic and spiritual man. And that influenced his writings as well. And we see this, especially for us in the English-speaking world, in two works. The Prologue of Ochrid, which you've heard me talk about before. It was originally published in 4 volumes. It's now published in 2 volumes. And it contains, for each day of the year, a short account of maybe 1, 2, or 3 of the lives of the saints of that day, a hymn of praise to maybe one of the saints or an event being celebrated. He gives a reflection. He writes some questions for contemplation, and then a short homily, all for that day. So from his works, this is what we know the most, which this was completed, compiled, and finished in 1928. The other work that is probably most well known from him in English is his Prayers by the Lake, which I think it's about the 5-volume set of poems and prayers. And that was written in 1922. So I want to first read a reflection on the prologue from St. Justin Popovich, and then I want to read one of the Prayers by the Lake so that you can see his inner man. And so, let's see. First, the reflection from St. Justin. So if you don't believe me and don't want to listen to me when I say, you should get the prologue, at least as a beginner, Cynics or something, if you don't have to listen to me, but listen to St. Justin. He says, the prologue is a most vital handbook, a holy handbook, the most essential reference book, a holy instruction book for every Serbian soul, and for every soul of the entire earthly Serbia, that also inhabits the heavenly Serbia. He was talking, not just about Serbia, obviously. For the same gospel applies to them from above as to us from below, since the Lord Christ is the same yesterday and today and forever. Whatever affliction you may have, just open this holy handbook, and you will find what you need. There are no difficulties that you may encounter which this holy handbook cannot handle, but it will give you the strength to overcome your difficulty with Christ our God. There are no passions that can overcome your soul, for which the prologue does not have a well-tested and sure antidote. There is not a sin that can overwhelm you or give your soul a fatal blow from which you cannot find deliverance. In the holy prologue, you will find deliverance and an escape from sin's most horrifying companions, death and the devil. If you are proud, and that is a deadly illness, the prologue has a well-tested medicine for you, holy humility. If you are lazy, and that is a deadly illness, the prologue has a well-tested medicine for you, holy vigils. If you are avaricious, and that is a deadly illness, the prologue has a well-tested medicine for you, holy poverty for Christ's sake. If you are irascible, and that is a deadly illness, the prologue has a well-tested medicine for you, holy gentleness and holy meekness. If you are conceited, and that is a deadly illness, the prologue has a well-tested medicine for you, holy self-reproach. If you are lascivious, and that is a deadly sin, the prologue has a well-tested medicine for you, holy prayer and holy fasting. If you are malicious or spiteful or envious or coarse or short-tempered or violent or a bully or a criminal, a murderer, a fornicator, an adulterer, a quarrelsome person, a slanderer, and these are all deadly sins, the prologue has a corresponding medicine for each of these sins. For each of these ailments, assured holy medicines that do not deceive. In general, if you suffer from any sin or from any passion, and every sin is an illness unto death, and every passion is an illness unto death. The prologue offers you holy medicines for every sin of yours, and a holy virtue for every passion. Only one thing is asked of you, to want and to desire a medicine for your sin. And so, not only most clearly with the lives of saints, and how the saints overcame their sins. But, in the various reflections and homilies, St. Justin is saying that there is medicine to be found. There is healing to be found in reading the prologue and to working on healing your soul. So, not just me, but St. Justin too. And lastly, I want to read you one of his prayers. Bless my enemies, O Lord, and I bless them and do not curse them. My enemies have driven me into your arms more than my friends have. My friends have bound me to the earth. My enemies have loosened my bonds from the earth and have torn up all my hopes in the earth. They have turned me into a stranger in the kingdoms of this earth and into a superfluous inhabitant of this earth. Like an animal that finds a safer shelter when hunted down rather than when not, so have I, hunted down by my enemies, found the safest shelter by hiding under thy tent, where neither friend nor foe can slay my soul. Bless my enemies, O Lord, and I bless them, and do not curse them. They, instead of me, have confessed my sins before the world. They flogged me when I hesitated to flog myself. They vexed me when I tried to flee from suffering. They scolded me when I flattered myself. They spat upon me when I took pride in myself. Bless my enemies, O Lord, and I bless them and do not curse them. When I pretended to be wise, they called me a fool. When I pretended to be mighty, they mocked me as a dwarf. When I wanted to lead the people, they pushed me into the background. When I rushed to enrich myself, they prevented me with an iron hand. When I thought that I could sleep peacefully, they awoke me from my slumber. When I erected a house for a long and tranquil life, they demolished it and drove me out. Truly my enemies have loosened my bonds from the world, and have stretched my hands to the hem of thy garment. Bless my enemies, O Lord, and I bless them and do not curse them. Bless them and multiply them and embitter them even more against me, so that my flight to thee has no return, so that my hope in men may be rent asunder like cobwebs, so that complete serenity may reign in my soul, so that my heart may become the grave of the two evils of my twins, arrogance and anger, so that I might gather all my treasure in heaven. So that I may for once be freed from self-deception, which has entangled me in the dreadful web of this illusory life. My enemies have made known to me what only a few know, that a person has no enemies in this world other than himself. Only he who knows that his enemies are not enemies, but brutal friends, hates them. Truly it is difficult for me to say who has done me greater good and greater evil in this world, my friends or foes. Therefore bless, O Lord, my friends and foes. A slave curses his enemies, for he does not understand, but a son blesses them, for he has understanding. For a son knows that his enemies cannot touch his life. Hence he walks freely among them and prays to God for them. Bless my enemies, O Lord, and I bless and do not curse them. You see the depths of his spiritual life. It's really amazing. If we had that thought in our own minds of how much others, through abuse, whether little or a lot, could actually drive us to God, and we weren't so egotistical and thinking so highly of ourselves all the time, we would be able to soar like the angels. So I'm going to end with that. You can find that prayer online. Just search Saint Nikolai, bless my enemies, something like that. I would suggest reading it again and thinking about it and what he's really saying, so that we can reframe our life in this world and how we can truly become closer to God. So with that, time's yours if there's any questions.